where I truly belong. A gay love story BL romance. The Romance Hub. Warning opening hook. Read this first warning. The morning I realized I was completely, devastatingly in love with my best friend, his arm was wrapped around my shoulder, and neither of us had moved in 11 minutes. I know the exact number because I had been staring at the clock on the wall, counting every single tick like it was keeping score of how long I could hold on to something I had no right to want. His chest rose and fell against my arm. His breathing was slow and deep, the kind of breathing that belongs only to sleep and to peace. And I remember thinking very clearly that if I stayed still enough, maybe time would forget to move forward. It didn't, of course. Time never does you that favor. He stirred beside me on the couch, and his arm tightened just briefly, just for 1/2 second, and my entire body went still like a deer in headlights, like something that knew it was about to be changed forever. His eyes opened, dark brown like coffee left to cool. They found mine immediately, the way they always did, the way his eyes had always found mine in every crowded room for the past 3 years. And he smiled. That slow, easy, unbothered smile. And he said with his voice still rough from sleep, with his hair falling over his forehead, with 11 minutes of my quiet devastation between us. Morning, Noah. And I understood in the weight of those 2 words that I was in serious, serious trouble. This is the story of how I fell in love with my best friend, how I fought it, denied it, lost it, and finally found my way back to the only place I had ever truly belonged. His name was Luca Mercer, and this is where it began. Freshman year, Ashford University. I arrived at Ashford University on a Tuesday in September with 2 duffel bags, 1 box of books I definitely didn't need, and the firm, carefully constructed belief that college would be the place where I finally figured out who I was. That's a lot of pressure to put on a campus of 12,000 students, and a meal plan that stopped working at 9 p.m. But I was 18 years old, Korean-American, quietly terrified and optimistic in that specific way that people are before the world has had enough chances to teach them otherwise. My parents had driven me up from Denton, a 4-hour trip that my mother spent alternating between telling me to call every day and reminding me not to eat instant noodles more than twice a week. My father was quieter. He carried the box of books up 3 flights of stairs without complaining, set it down by the window, looked at me for a moment longer than usual and said, "You'll be okay." I believed him. I almost always believed him, even when I probably shouldn't have. The dorm room on the 3rd floor of Hartley Hall was small too. Narrow beds, 2 desks, 1 window that looked out on the parking lot, and a ceiling that had a water stain shaped vaguely like the state of Florida. My roommate wasn't there yet. I unpacked in the silence, arranged my books alphabetically the way I always did, and sat on the edge of my bed in the late afternoon light, thinking about how strange it was to be somewhere so completely new. I heard him before I saw him, footsteps in the hallway, not hurried, but confident, the kind of walk that doesn't apologize for taking up space. Then the door opened, and Luca Mercer came in carrying what appeared to be an architectural model of a small building under one arm, a duffel bag over one shoulder, and an expression on his face that suggested this particular arrangement was completely normal and expected. He was taller than me by a few inches, with dark curly hair and olive skin, and the build of someone who played sports casually rather than obsessively. He wore a gray t-shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dark jeans, and he moved through the doorway like he already owned the room, not arrogantly, just comfortably, the way some people do when They are genuinely at ease with themselves in a way that I, at 18, deeply envied. He set the building model carefully on his desk, dropped the duffel, and turned around. His eyes found me the way I would later learn his eyes always found people, directly, without hesitation, with genuine attention. He smiled. "Hey, I'm Luca." He crossed the room and offered his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I shook it, and he had a firm grip and warm hands. "Noah," I said. "Noah Park." "Cool," he said, and meant it, and that was the beginning. We spent that first night the way most freshman roommates do, lying in our respective beds in the dark, talking to the ceiling. He told me he was from Chicago, that his father was a structural engineer and his mother taught high school history, that he'd wanted to study architecture for as long as he could remember, that he was the kind of person who needed noise to sleep and would probably play lo-fi music most nights. And was that okay? I said it was okay. He asked me what I was studying. I said English literature. He said, "So you like stories?" And I said, "I guess I do." And there was a pause, and then he said, "I think that's one of the best things a person can like." And I remember staring at the ceiling after that, unsure what to do with a statement that simple and that sincere from someone I had known for approximately 4 hours. The lo-fi music played softly from his phone on the desk between us. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing settling into that slow, easy rhythm I would come to know, the way you know a song that plays in the background of your life for years. I lay awake longer, listening to it, thinking that college might not be so terrifying after all. Friendship, I have learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through repeated proximity and small kindnesses, through shared meals and late-night conversations, and the gradual discovery that another person understands the specific texture of your thoughts. That's how it was with Luca and me. We became friends the way a tide comes in slowly and then all at once, and then so completely that you couldn't quite remember what the shore looked like before it. By October, we were eating most meals together in the dining hall. By November, we had a routine coffee at 7:30, classes, a check-in, text around 3, studying at the library or in the room depending on the night. He was the kind of student who sketched while he studied, filling the margins of his notebooks with small detailed drawings of buildings and structures that I would sometimes look at when he wasn't watching, marveling at how much patience and precision lived in his hands. I wrote in the margins of my notebooks too, phrases, fragments, half-formed lines of poetry that I would later cross out furiously in case anyone ever read them. We were both, in our different ways, people who needed to make things in order to process the world. He was also, I discovered, one of the funniest people I had ever met. Not performatively funny, not the kind of person who needed an audience. Just quietly, consistently, exactly funny, the kind of humor that arrives without warning in the middle of something serious and makes you laugh so hard you have to put down whatever you're holding. He had a way of observing things, small, human, absurd things that made ordinary moments feel like they were worth paying attention to. I had been writing down observations my whole life, meeting someone who observed the world the way Luca did felt, in the least dramatic way I can describe it, like meeting a person who spoke a language I thought only I knew. We stayed up until 2 in the morning on a Thursday in November, the night before his first major architecture review, and I helped him prepare his presentation by pretending to be a highly critical professor who asked impossible questions. He demolished every one of my questions with genuine architectural reasoning, and then stood up, gestured at the model on his desk with both hands, and said, in a voice of complete confidence, "This is the best small transit hub in the History of freshman year, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong. I laughed until I had to hold the edge of my desk. He looked at me while I laughed, smiling in that unhurried, warm way, and said, "See, that's the reaction I want from the professor tomorrow." He got a B+, which he declared a moral victory. Somewhere in that semester, without either of us deciding it, we became each other's person, the one you call when something happens, the one whose face you look for first in a crowd, the one who knows, without being told when you're having a hard day, and who sits with you in it rather than trying to immediately fix it. I hadn't had that before, not like that, not with that particular quality of ease and depth, and I didn't examine what it meant at 18 because I didn't have the framework yet to understand what I was starting to feel. Or maybe I was already starting to sense it, and I was choosing, very deliberately, not to look directly at it. That is perhaps how all the important things begin, not with a recognition, but with a very careful looking away. By the end of freshman year, Luca Mercer was the most important person in my life, and I told myself that was simply what best friendship felt like. I had no particular reason at that point to believe I was wrong. Sophomore and junior year. Sophomore year, we got a 2-person apartment on Fletcher Street, 6 blocks off campus, above a dry cleaner that perpetually smelled of warm fabric and something vaguely floral. It was small, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that could only comfortably hold 1 person, a living room that doubled as Luca's design studio most of the time, but it was our, in the way that shared spaces become yours when you fill them with your specific habits and preferences and the accumulated mess of 2 people learning to be adults at the same time. I had the bedroom on the left, he had the one on the right. There was 1 wall between us, and at night I could sometimes hear his music through it, not clearly, just as a low, steady hum, the loaf playlists that had been the background sound of our first year together. I can't explain why I found it comforting, except to say that there is something specific and irreplaceable about the sound of someone you care about being near and okay. Life in that apartment had a texture I still remember, with the kind of detailed affection usually reserved for childhood. Luca cooked most mornings scrambled eggs that were somehow always perfect, coffee that was always too strong, toast that was always slightly burnt in, which he ate without complaint. I read at the kitchen table while he cooked, and we talked without looking at each other, the kind of talking that only happens between people who are so comfortable each other's presence that they no longer need eye contact to communicate. We watched films on the couch on Friday nights. His suggestions were always either heist movies or architectural documentaries. Mine were always slow European dramas that he claimed put him to sleep, but which he always managed to stay awake for. We disagreed about music. We agreed about almost everything else. It was in sophomore year that I began, very quietly and very privately, to understand something about myself that I had been aware of in the background for years. I had never been particularly drawn to the girls in my classes, had never felt the specific gravity that my friends described when they talked about attraction. I'd written it off as shyness, as being too busy, as simply being a different kind of person. But that year, in the slow accumulation of ordinary days, I began to notice things, the way my attention moved in certain directions, the way particular kinds of presence made the room feel different, the way I felt when Luca walked into a room versus the way I felt any other time. I didn't call it anything for a long time. Numbing things I knew from literature makes them real in ways that are difficult to undo, so I simply let it exist as an awareness, quiet, unspoken, carefully compartmentalized, and went on being his best friend, which was the truest and most important thing I had ever been to another person, and which I had absolutely no intention of endangering with something as unpredictable as an unexamined feeling. Luca dated a girl named Priya for 4 months in sophomore year. She was kind and smart, and they laughed a lot together, and I liked her quite genuinely, which made the specific and particular discomfort I felt when they were together something I could not entirely explain away. I told myself I was simply protective of my friend, that I was worried about the dynamic changing, that I had always been more of an introvert, and shared attention was something that took getting used to. I told myself a lot of things, some of them were partially true. When they broke up mutually, quietly, without drama, Luca spent an evening that was more reflective than devastated, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, and he said to me, "I think I kept waiting to feel something more, like there was always this sense that something was just slightly off, the way a room feels when you've moved one piece of furniture and you can't figure out which one it was." He looked at his tea. "I think that's not fair to someone." I sat beside him and said, "No, it isn't, but it's honest." And he nodded slowly, and we sat in the quiet together, and I thought about what it meant to know that something was missing without being able to name what it was. Junior year came in the way third years always do, with the sudden, slightly terrifying awareness that this was no longer the beginning of something, that choices were being made and paths were being set, that the person you were becoming was starting to take a fixed shape. I had declared my concentration in creative writing. Luca was deep in his design studio, working longer and harder than he ever had, pulling late nights over models and blueprints with a focused intensity that I found, objectively, one of the most compelling things I had ever seen. There is something genuinely magnetic about watching someone who is deeply, authentically in love with what they do. The way Luca looked at a half-finished model at 1 in the morning, with that particular quality of concentration, turning it slowly in his hands, his brow slightly furrowed, his lower lip caught between his teeth in a way that meant he was working something out. I would catch myself watching him and then immediately look back at whatever I was supposed to be doing, feeling a warmth in my chest that I was running out of ways to explain as anything other than what it was. It was in junior year that something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else would have noticed or named, just a small internal reorganization, the way tectonic plates move invisibly, until one day a new landscape has formed that you can't quite map back to what it was before. The shift happened on a Wednesday night in November, during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power on Fletcher Street for 3 hours. We'd been in the middle of different things. I was reading, he was sketching, and when the lights went out, we found candles and set them on the coffee table, and ended up sitting on the floor with our backs against the couch, talking in the dark in a way that the darkness always permits. Something about candle light and powerlessness makes people honest. We talked about our families, his complicated relationship with his father, who wanted him to follow a more lucrative career path, and who did not entirely understand the specific passion his son had for design. I talked about my parents' quiet, particular form of love, attentive but not expressive, supportive in ways that were real but sometimes hard to feel. And then, in one of those pauses that conversations sometimes fall into, he said quietly, looking at the candles rather than at me, "Do you ever feel like there's a version of yourself that you haven't been brave enough to let people see yet?" The question landed in my chest like a stone in still water. I looked at the side of his face in the candlelight, the angle of his jaw, the curve of his nose, the way his hair fell forward, and I Felt something inside me that was very precisely the feeling of standing on the edge of something high, looking down, knowing that eventually there is a step you have to take. I said, "Yeah, I do," and my voice was steadier than I expected. He nodded slowly, like I had confirmed something he already suspected. "Me too," he said, "that was all. The power came back on 20 minutes. Later, and we blinked in the sudden brightness, and he stood up and stretched and said he was going to make tea, and the conversation shifted to something lighter, and the night moved on. But I lay in my bed that night and stared at the ceiling and understood, with a clarity that I could no longer argue with, that I had a very serious problem, not a problem with Luca, not a problem with what I felt. The problem was simpler and more complicated than either of those. I was in love with my best friend. I had probably been in love with my best friend for longer than I had admitted to myself. And I had absolutely no idea what to do about it, because the most important thing in my life was what we had, and I was not going to be the person who broke it. So I made a decision that night, in the dark of my room on Fletcher Street, while his lo-fi music hummed through the wall between us. I would not say anything. I would keep it contained, keep it private. Keep it as the quiet secret it had been all along. I would be his best friend. I was good at being his best friend. That would be enough. I almost convinced myself. September, October. Senior year arrived with a kind of weight that I hadn't entirely anticipated. The thesis loomed, the future loomed, every conversation had the undertone of endings and beginnings running through it, the particular bittersweet frequency of knowing that something you love is moving inevitably toward its conclusion. I threw myself into my writing. Luca threw himself into his capstone design project. We were both working harder than we ever had, and somewhere in the intensity of that, our evenings together became more precious to both of us in a way neither of us quite said out loud. We had kept the apartment on Fletcher Street for our senior year. The dry cleaner downstairs had changed ownership and now smelled inexplicably of cinnamon instead of florals, but everything else was the same. His models on the living room table, my books stacked by the window, the couch with the slightly broken left cushion that we had both long since adjusted to, the kitchen that held one person at a time, the same lo-fi music through the wall, the same Friday night films, the same coffee in the mornings, familiar in the way that only the most important things become familiar, not because they are ordinary but because they are chosen, again and again, without thinking about it. I was managing the feeling the way I had been managing it for over a year, which is to say, not well but with a certain practiced functionality that allowed me to be present and normal and his best friend without betraying what lived underneath. The strategy was straightforward: don't look too long, don't touch when you don't need to, don't let your voice do the thing it wants to do when he says your name, don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. It worked more or less until a Thursday in September, when it stopped working entirely. We were in the library, the East reading room on the third floor, which at 9 at night was mostly empty, lit by the warm glow of old pendant lights. He was across the table from me, working on structural calculation that he kept getting wrong by small fractions. And he was doing that thing he did when he was frustrated, pressing his pen against his lower lip, staring at the paper with narrowed eyes. Completely still, I was supposed to be annotating sources for my thesis. I was instead watching him. I had been writing a line in the margins of my notebook, not a thesis note, just the kind of line that comes sometimes when you're supposed to be doing something else, the ones that feel like they wrote themselves. The way he concentrates, I think, like everything else goes dark. Like the whole world just falls quiet for him. I wish I knew what that felt like, to need nothing else, to be that completely inside. Something, or maybe I do know. Maybe this is exactly what that feels like. He looked up suddenly, and I didn't look away fast enough. His eyes met mine across the table, and there was a moment, a small, charged, suspended moment where neither of us moved. Then he tilted his head slightly and said, "You okay?" the way he always asked it, not perfunctory, genuinely wanting to know. I said, "Yeah, just thinking." He held the eye contact a beat longer than he needed to, then smiled faintly and went back to his calculations. My heart rate did not return to normal for some time. These moments had been accumulating, small ones, subtle ones, the kind that can be explained away individually, but that form a pattern. When you stack them together, the way he always chose the seat next to me when there were other options, the way he remembered things, small specific things, things I mentioned once months ago that I wouldn't have expected him to retain, the way he would sometimes reach over and adjust my scarf or straighten my collar without comment, with a casual intimacy that was so natural he didn't seem to notice he was doing it, the way his face changed when I walked into a room, just a fraction, just a small brightening that I had spent a long time trying to decide if I was imagining. I was spending a lot of time trying to decide what I was imagining. October came in cool and golden, the kind of autumn that the campus was spectacular in, the old maple trees along the main boulevard going red and amber and deep orange in a way that felt deliberately staged. I had always loved this campus in October. I had spent 3 previous Octobers at Ashford, and in each one, some of the sharpest and clearest moments of my life had happened, which was maybe just the effect of the season, the year turning, the specific quality of light that makes everything feel more vivid and more temporary simultaneously. It was in October that 2 things happened that changed the trajectory of everything. The first was the party. One of the architecture students, a third year named Jordan, who Luca knew through the design studio, was throwing a birthday gathering at his apartment near the arts building. It was a modest thing, maybe 20 people, music at a reasonable volume, the kind of gathering that's actually a party but calls itself something else. Luca wanted to go. He asked if I would come with him. I said yes, because I always said yes to things I could do with Luca, which was not a pattern I was examining very carefully at the time. We went on a Saturday. The apartment was warm and crowded and bright, and within 20 minutes, Luca had been absorbed into a conversation with several people from the architecture program, while I had found a spot near the bookshelf, because there is always a bookshelf at a party with people like us, and you can always find where I am by looking for the bookshelf. I was looking at the titles when someone came to stand beside me. His name was Marcus Cole. He introduced himself easily, with the kind of social confidence that some people are simply born with. He was in the architecture program, a year above Luca, with a quiet intensity to him and dark eyes that were intelligent and a little bit appraising. He made easy conversation. He was interesting, and as we talked I was aware, with the particular precision of someone who has become expert at reading the invisible language of interpersonal dynamics, that his attention was directed not at me, but at the person who had just appeared at the edge of the room. Luca had spotted me by the bookshelf and was making his way over, holding 2 drinks, navigating the room with that easy physicality of his. Marcus turned slightly, and something changed in his expression. A small, specific alertness, like a signal received. "That your roommate?" he asked. "Best friend," I said, and the word landed in my own chest with a particular weight. Luca reached us and handed me one of the drinks, and I introduced them. And they shook hands, and I watched Marcus direct his full attention at Luca in a way that I understood immediately and completely, because it was exactly the kind of attention I spent most of my time trying to conceal. The evening went on. Marcus and Luca talked. They had easy chemistry. They were in the same field. They had the same kind of focused passion. For design, they spoke a shared language. I watched it from a small distance, talking to others, refilling my drink, being perfectly fine, performing the precise version of Noah, who is having a good time and feels nothing in particular about any of this, with what I considered impressive skill. We walked home along the Maple Line Boulevard at midnight, Luca and I, leaves on the sidewalk under our feet, the night air cold and clean. He was quiet for a block, then he said, "Marcus seems cool." I said, "Yeah, he does." Another half block of silence. "He's doing a thesis on adaptive reuse in post-industrial spaces," Luca said. As if this were relevant. "Interesting topic," I said. He nodded. We walked the rest of the way in quiet that had a different texture than our usual quiet, less settled, more aware of itself. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling and identified, for the first time, and with a clarity that was almost like relief, the exact quality of what I was feeling. It was jealousy, not complicated, not dressed up as something else. Just plain and simple. And terrible jealousy, the kind that tells you exactly what you want by showing you very precisely what you cannot stand the thought of losing. I pulled the pillow over my face in the dark of my room and breathed slowly and thought, okay, this is what it is. Now figure out what you are going to do about it. The answer came to me quickly, the same thing I had always done. Nothing, absolutely nothing, and with more effort than before. The second thing that changed everything happened 2 weeks later. On a Tuesday night in our living room, in the most ordinary possible circumstances, we were watching a film, one of his choices this time, a heist movie I'd seen before, comfortable and predictable in the way that familiar things are. I was on my end of the couch, he was on his. There was the usual comfortable distance between us. The broken left cushion was behaving. The room smelled like the pasta he'd made an hour ago. Everything was exactly normal, except that somewhere around the 40-minute mark, without either of us noticing it happen, the comfortable distance had disappeared. We had both shifted, over the course of 40 minutes of a film, in the incremental way that people move toward warmth, and we were now sitting close, his shoulder against mine, his arm resting along the back of the couch behind me. It had happened completely unconsciously. Neither of us called attention to it. Neither of us moved away. I stared at the screen and felt the warmth of him against my shoulder, and didn't watch a single frame of the film for the next 40 minutes. When it ended, we sat for a moment in the post-film quiet, the way you do, letting the story settle, and then his arm, the one along the back of the couch, dropped lightly onto my shoulder, casual, friendly. He did that sometimes. He was a physical person in the easy, uncomplicated way of people who grew up with physical affection and never learned to be self-conscious about it. He looked at me. "Good movie," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You didn't watch the second half," he said. He was smiling. He had noticed. Of course he had noticed. "I was thinking," I said. "About what?" I looked at him. He was very close. His eyes were on mine. The room was warm and low lit, and the ending credits of the film were scrolling behind his head like some kind of elaborate backdrop. "Nothing important," I said. He held my gaze for a moment longer, that extra beat that I was always analyzing and never quite understanding, and then he smiled. and said okay, and the moment passed the way moments do, leaving only its impression behind. He took his arm back and stood and said, he was going to bed. I said good night. He said good night. The door to his room closed. I sat on the couch for a long time after that, alone in the blue glow of the TV screen, thinking about nothing important, thinking about exactly one thing, running the math on a feeling that kept refusing to add up to anything except itself. October, November. Marcus started coming around. Not frequently, not intrusively, but with the particular regularity of someone who is building towards something, studying with Luca at the library, appearing at the design studio when Luca was there, texting in ways I was only aware of because Luca mentioned them. It was all perfectly innocent. It was all entirely reasonable. Two people in the same program who had met at a party and found they had things in common. There was nothing to object to. There was nothing to explain my reaction to, even to myself, except that specific and irrefutable thing I kept returning to. I knew what Marcus's attention meant because I recognized it, and I hated recognizing it more than I had words for. Luca seemed to enjoy his company. He talked about Marcus with the easy warmth he extended to people he liked, a natural, unguarded openness. That was one of the things I loved most about him, and which I was finding right now genuinely difficult to sit with. He mentioned that Marcus had suggested they collaborate on a small side project, a conceptual redesign of an unused community space near the edge of town. It could be good, he said over coffee one morning, not quite looking at me. He has good instincts, I said. Sounds like a good project. And I meant it, and I didn't mean it simultaneously, and I drank my coffee and went to class. Here is what no one tells you about loving someone who doesn't know you love them. The worst part is not the longing you can learn to live with, the way you live with whether you can't change. The worst part is the fear that they will find what they need somewhere else, and you will watch them become happy in a way that has nothing to do with you, and you will have to be glad about it because you love them, and being glad about it will be the hardest thing you have ever done. I was very much in that fear, and I had no idea what to do with it, except write, which is what I always did with things I couldn't otherwise process. My thesis had been developing slowly all year, a collection of linked short stories, each one exploring a different kind of love and the specific ways people talk around it instead of through it. My advisor, Professor Callahan, a woman with severe reading glasses and a very precise definition of what constituted good prose, had told me the work had genuine emotional intelligence, but was missing a full commitment to the truth at its center. I knew exactly what she meant. I was writing around the thing I wouldn't name, and the work suffered for it the way everything suffers when it is built around an absence. I started writing differently in November. I started committing to the truth at the center, the way Callahan had said, letting the thing that was real in me move through the words rather than holding it at arm's length. The stories became sharper and more honest and infinitely more painful to write. I would finish a session at my desk and feel like I'd been turned inside out. I would close my laptop and hear Luca's music through the wall and feel the odd double sensation of being in exactly the right place and completely, helplessly lost in it. One afternoon in early November, he came into my room without knocking. We had always had that kind of apartment where knocking was the exception rather than the rule, and found me at my desk with my head in my hands over a draft that was not working. He came up behind me without a word and read over my shoulder for a moment, and then he put his hand briefly on my shoulder, that easy, natural touch, and said, Quietly, "It's good, Noah. What you're doing is good." He didn't elaborate. He went back to his room. I sat there with the warmth of his hand still registering on my shoulder and thought, I cannot keep doing this, and then thought I have no other option, and then sat there for a very long time, accomplishing nothing in particular. It was the last week of November when Luca told me. We were in the kitchen, he was cooking, I was at the table. He was making something with garlic and tomatoes that made the whole apartment smell like Sunday evenings. He had his back to me and he'd been quiet, in a way that had a color to it, a particular quality of thought I had learned to read over 3 years. Something was turning over in him. Something was working toward the surface. He turned the heat down and turned around and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, and he looked at me with an expression that was very Luca, direct, slightly searching, a little bit uncertain, in a way that sat strangely on a face that was usually so sure of itself. He said, "Can I tell you something?" I looked up from my book. "Always," I said, and meant it. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor, then back at me. Then he said with a careful, slightly deliberate quality, "The way you say something out loud that you've been practicing privately. I think Marcus might be interested in me, like in that way." Pause, and I've been thinking about it. The kitchen was very quiet. The garlic was softening. The evening light was coming through the window at a long angle. I kept my face completely still. I had years of practice at this. "How are you thinking about it?" I asked. My voice was steady. I was genuinely proud of how steady it was. He shook his head slightly. "I don't know, that's the thing. I keep going back and forth. Like he's interesting and I like spending time with him, but I'm not sure if what I feel is." He trailed off, looking for words. He picked them up again. "I don't know if it's what it needs to be something real." He looked at me. "Does that make sense?" "It makes sense," I said. "You had that feeling before with Priya." Like something was off register. I was quoting him back to himself, because I had kept every word he had ever said to me, filed away in the part of my memory that held the things that mattered. Something crossed his face, a brief, unreadable thing. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, kind of like that." He turned back to the stove after a moment. "What do you think I should do?" "What do I think you should do?" What a question to ask the person who has been in love with you for longer than either of you knows. "I think," I said slowly, "that you should be honest with yourself about what you actually feel, not what you think you should feel. And I think you should be kind to both of you, whatever you decide." It was genuinely good advice. I was not entirely certain it was advice I could follow myself. He was quiet for a while. Then, "Thanks, Noah," soft, certain. We ate dinner and talked about other things, and the evening passed the way evenings do. But I lay in bed that night and felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the specific ache of things moving without you, of the world going on in the direction it goes in, regardless of whether you are ready for it. I made myself say, into the dark of my room, what I needed to say. "If it makes him happy, it's enough. It has to be enough," I said it 3 times like an incantation. Whether I believed it is a different question entirely. November, back to where we started. 2 weeks after that conversation, I woke up on the couch with Luca's arm around my shoulder. I had known this moment was coming the way you sometimes know things before they happen, in the marrow of something deeper than thought. Let me explain how we got there. We had stayed up late on a Friday, very late, later than usual even. For us, the kind of late that tips over into early morning without anyone noticing. He had been struggling with a section of his capstone design, something about the structural load distribution in the central atrium, and I had been stuck on a story in my thesis collection that wasn't resolving the way it needed to. We'd started at our respective ends of the apartment and ended up, over the course of 4 hours, gravitating to the living room couch the way we always did when we were both working and needed to be near something human. By 2 in the morning he had solved his structural problem, I knew, because he made a quiet sound of relief and set his pencil down with a specific kind of finality, and a few minutes later I had found the ending my story needed, the one that had been right there all along, waiting for me to be tired enough to stop overthinking it. We had both set down what we were carrying at approximately the same time, and we sat in the easy silence of people who have both just finished something difficult, and we talked for a while about nothing in particular: the thesis, his project, a film he'd seen that week, story I was reading, and somewhere in that quiet conversation, in the warmth of the room at 2:30 in the morning, we both fell asleep. He woke up before me, or maybe we woke at the same moment. All I know is that when I surfaced from sleep, the gray light of early morning was in the room, his arm was around my shoulder, and he was already awake, watching the morning come through the window. 11 minutes, I know because I stared at the clock, and I didn't move and he didn't move, and the morning was very quiet. "Morning, Noah," he said, with his voice still rough and his hair falling over his forehead, and the 2 words landed in my chest like the final line of a story I had been trying to write for 3 years. I said morning, and I moved, I sat forward, I put distance between us, I did what needed to be done, and the 11 minutes ended. He stretched and stood and went to make coffee. I sat on the couch for a moment alone, with my hands clasped and my eyes on the middle distance, running through everything I knew and had decided and had committed to. It wasn't enough. That was the truth. I couldn't keep outrunning it. Was never going to be enough. I showered and dressed, and when I came out, he was at the kitchen table with 2 coffees and a look on his face that was harder to read than usual. He handed me mine. I sat. We drank in silence that had a weight to it, a presence, the way silence has when something has shifted and both people are deciding whether to acknowledge it. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Have I?" Different quiet. He was watching me over his coffee mug, like something is occupying a lot of space in your head that you're not letting out. That was exactly right. That was exactly what was happening. "I'm fine," I said, thesis stress. He looked at me for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. He didn't push. He never pushed when I said I was fine. He trusted me to come to him when I was ready. That trust right now felt like a weight I was carrying incorrectly, like I had picked up something precious and was holding it wrong and was starting to feel it in my hands. The day passed, and the week, and I held what I was holding and tried to hold it well, and found that I was doing this less and less successfully as December approached and everything tightened. November, December. I started pulling away, not dramatically, not in a way that could be pointed at, just small increments, staying later in the library, eating lunch alone more often, being the one in the apartment who was in his room rather than the common space, building a small, careful distance to work in, the way you need distance to see something whole. I told myself it was temporary, a recalibration, a way of getting my bearings. What it actually was, I think, was a kind of grief. I was grieving something that had never officially existed, which is a very particular and lonesome kind of grief. I was grieving the version of things where I had said something and it had gone well, a version that only lived in the early morning on the couch when he said my name, and I couldn't pretend anymore that I didn't want more than what we had, and I was grieving that version while it was still hypothetical, because grieving it in advance felt safer than risking the real thing. Luca noticed. Of course Luca noticed. He was the person who noticed. When I was not watching the second half of a film, he was incapable of not paying attention to me, which was both the thing I loved most and the thing that was making all of this significantly harder. He didn't say anything at first. He adjusted the way Luca always adjusted to the shape of what the people around him needed, with a kind of emotional intelligence that was effortless on the surface, and which I knew from years of watching him cost him something. He left me space. He didn't push. He sent occasional texts during the day, not many, just the right amount, the kind that said I'm here. Without saying it directly, I read every one of them in the library and felt terrible about myself. Marcus had officially asked Luca to get coffee. I knew this because Luca told me, with a careful neutrality that I recognized as consideration for my mood, which I also recognized as evidence that he saw more than he was saying. He said, I said yes just to talk. I said good. We were in the kitchen again. I was the one with my back to him this time. You sure you're okay? He asked. Absolutely, I said with my face pointed at the window. He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel that quality of silence that meant he wanted to say more and was choosing not to. Then he said, okay, Noah, and left. The coffee happened on a Tuesday. I was in the library. I told myself I wasn't thinking about it, which was of course the most effective way of thinking about it constantly. I wrote 600 words of thesis and deleted 400 of them. I walked home in the dark. He was already back. He was in his room with the door slightly open and the music on, which was his normal, and I went to my room without saying hello, which was not mine. I sat at my desk and looked at my reflection in the dark window and had a conversation with myself that was overdue. This is not sustainable, you know that. The distance you're creating is going to become the thing that damages this, not the feeling itself, but the running from it. You have built something with this person over 3 years that is real and rare and worth more than almost anything you can name, and right now you are slowly dismantling your end of it because you are afraid. You are afraid of saying something and it changing everything. You are afraid that what you feel is not returned. You are afraid of being the person who made things complicated and uncomfortable when they were supposed to be simple and good. But here is the thing, they are not simple. They have not been simple for a long time. And Luca, who is the most perceptive person you know, who has never once missed what matters, knows something is wrong, and you are choosing your fear over his trust, and that is the thing you will regret, not saying it, choosing silence over honesty when honesty is what you have always built this on. I looked at my reflection for a long time. Then I picked up my notebook and wrote for 3 hours, not the thesis. Just for myself, all of it, everything I had been holding, the whole unedited truth of what I felt, and what I feared, and what I wanted, and what I couldn't bear to lose. I wrote until my hand hurt and the apartment was quiet and the digital clock said 2:14 a.m. and the music from the other side of the wall had stopped, which meant he was asleep. I put the notebook down. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it yet, but I had stopped pretending it wasn't there, which felt even just in the private space of a bedroom at 2 in the morning like the first true thing I had done in weeks. The next morning Luca was making coffee when I came out of my room. He turned around and looked at me and said, not quite as a question, more as an observation, you slept, like he had been aware I hadn't been before this. I said, yeah, I did. He handed me my coffee. Our fingers touched briefly on the mug, and neither of us moved away for a second longer than was necessary. He looked at me and I looked back. And something in the air had a different quality, not resolved, but honest, like we had both been waiting for something and one of us had finally stopped pretending to wait. But I still wasn't ready to say it. I needed a little more time, little more courage, and events, as it turned out, did not wait for me to find it. December first week. The architecture department's year-end showcase was on a Friday in the first week of December. It was a formal presentation, students' capstone projects displayed in the main design gallery on the second floor of the arts building, faculty walking through, parents invited. The kind of evening that marks the end of a long and serious effort. Luca had been working toward it for the entire semester. His project, a community center designed for an underserved neighborhood, built around the principles of biophilic design and adaptive reuse, was genuinely extraordinary. I had watched it develop over months, seen the models evolve, heard him talk through the ideas at the kitchen table, and I knew, with the particular certainty of someone who had been paying close attention, that it was his best work. He asked me to come. He always asked me to come to the important things. "You're the first person I want there," he said, simple and direct, the way he always was about the things that mattered to him. I said I would be there. I got ready that evening with a specific intention. I had spent all day thinking about what I needed to say to him, not everything, not all of it, not tonight, not in the middle of his showcase, but something. Some opening of the conversation, some beginning of the honesty I had been rehearsing at my desk at 2 in the morning. I just needed to start somewhere. The gallery was warm and crowded and full of good work. I found his display on the far wall, a full architectural model detailed elevations, material samples, the whole elegant, considered presentation of a year of serious design thinking. It was beautiful, it was completely him. I stood in front of it and felt a kind of pride that I couldn't keep off my face, a warm, specific fullness in my chest. That was not just about the work, but about the person who had made it. I found him across the room talking to 2 faculty members, animated and confident, using his hands the way he always did when he was passionate about something. He spotted me and his face changed, that small brightening, that involuntary happiness, and he said something to the faculty members and made his way over to me. "You found it," he said, gesturing to his display. He was dressed more formally than usual, dark slacks, a button-down shirt, his hair pushed back. He looked, I didn't let the thought finish. I had practice at that. "It's incredible," I said. "Luca, it's genuinely incredible." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that was quieter than his usual ones, a little unguarded, the kind that was just for people who mattered. "Thanks for coming," he said. "It means a lot." We were standing very close together, the way you do in a crowded room. And I was about to say something. I had the words ready, I had the opening I was going to start, when Marcus appeared. He came from across the room, holding 2 glasses of water, with a quiet smile that was directed at Luca in a way that was entirely and unmistakably warm. He put a hand briefly on Luca's shoulder, the easy physical comfort of someone who has been building towards something. "Great work," he said to Luca and to me. "Hey, Noah." "Hey," I said. And the moment I had been gathering myself toward dissolved. It just went, like trying to hold smoke. I stayed for another hour, and I talked to people I knew, and I was present and appropriate and fine, but I had shut something down inside me quietly, with a kind of careful resignation, the way you close a window against coming rain. When the evening started to wind down, I told Luca I was heading out, that I had an early morning, which was a lie, and which he probably knew was a lie, and which he received with an expression that was more complex than I could read in the moment. "I'll see you back at the apartment," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Congratulations, Luca. Seriously, it's beautiful work." He looked at me for a moment longer than the situation required. "Stay," he said quietly, not demanding, just asking, just that one word, with the full weight of 3 years behind it. "I'll see you at home," I said. And I walked out into the cold December night and stood on the steps of the Arts Building for a long time, my breath fogging in the air. The street lights on the wet pavement, the whole quiet campus going about its evening around me, and I felt something in me crack, not break, crack, the way things crack right before they change shape. I walked home slowly, taking the long route through the Maple Boulevard, where the leaves were all down now, the branches bare and black against the dark sky. I had my hands in my pockets and my face in the cold, and I was having, very honestly, the most difficult internal conversation I had ever had with myself. It went approximately like this: "You are not okay. You have not been okay for a while. You are in love with your best friend, and you have been afraid of that for long enough. That the fear has started costing more than the love. You have been pulling away from the most important relationship in your life because you cannot hold what you feel and pretend you don't at the same time. And the pretending is winning, and you are losing him, not to Marcus, not to anyone else, but to your own silence. And that is the thing you cannot let happen. That is the thing that would be unforgivable." I got home before him. I sat on the couch in the dark, still in my coat, and I waited. And while I waited, I did something I had not done in 3 years. I let myself feel the whole of it without trying to manage it or contain it or reshape it into something more comfortable. I let it be exactly what it was, as large and as frightening and as true as it was. I held it in both hands finally without flinching. It was, even in that difficult moment, a kind of relief. He came home 45 minutes later. I heard his key in the lock. He came in and turned on the lamp and found me on the couch and stopped. "You didn't go to bed," he said. "No," I said. He set his keys down. He sat on the other end of the couch, not the close end, just the couch, and he looked at me. His tie was loosened. His jacket was in his hand. He looked very tired and very real and very much like himself, and my chest was doing the thing it always did around him, that specific tightening that I had been calling anxiety, and which had never been anxiety at all. "Okay," he said quietly. "Talk to me, whatever it is, just talk to me, Noah." And the thing about Luca is that when he said it like that, directly, openly, with that quality of attention that had always made me feel like the only person in a room, I could never quite hold my ground against it always reached me. He always reached me. I opened my mouth, I closed it, I looked at my hands. "I don't know where to start," I said. "Doesn't matter," he said, "just start." The room was very quiet. The lamp was warm and low. Outside, December was doing what December does, cold and still and final. I said, "I've been distant, I know, and I need you to know it's not because of you, not because of anything you did. It's because I've been carrying something that I don't know how to put down, and I don't know how to carry either, and I've been trying to figure out which of those two things to do, and making a mess of both." He was very still. His eyes were on me. I kept going, and I need to say something before I think about it long enough to talk myself out of it again, because I have talked myself out of it 100 times, and I am tired of doing that. I am so tired of doing that. I looked at him. My heart was going at a rate that I was not going to describe as calm. "I love you. I don't mean the way I always mean it when I say it. I mean the other way. The all of it way. The way I can't unlearn and couldn't stop if I wanted To which I know is, my voice faltered briefly. I steadied it. Which I know is a lot, and I know it's potentially complicated, and I'm not saying it to change anything or put pressure on anything. I'm saying it because not saying it was hurting us more than saying it could, and you asked me to talk to you, and this is what I needed to say. The room was very quiet. Luca had not moved. His eyes were on mine, and they had not moved from mine for the entire time I was speaking, and they were doing something that I had no framework for reading, some expression that was too many things at once, and the silence stretched for 1 second, 2, 3. And I was cataloging all the possible responses and trying to prepare myself for each of them, trying to ready myself to be gracious and calm and his friend, his good and steady friend, regardless of what came next. He said, Noah. Just my name, low and careful and charged the way he had said it that morning on the couch, but different, fuller, more weighted, like it was carrying something in it that needed to be put down. Then he said, I have been trying to figure out how to say the same thing to you for 6 months. December, that same night. I need you to understand how it felt to hear that. Not the way you might expect, not immediately euphoric, not a rush of uncomplicated joy. It was something more complicated and more profound than that. It was the feeling of a weight you have carried so long that you've forgotten it's a weight finally being acknowledged by the person you carried it alongside without knowing it. It was the specific, shattering relief of being understood by the right person. I said nothing, I just looked at him, and he looked at me, and neither of us seemed to know what the next sentence was, only that it needed to be true. He moved first. He shifted down the couch toward me, not abruptly, not urgently, just steadily, the way you close a distance that should never have existed. He turned to face me properly, one knee on the cushion, and the lamp was warm between us, and his eyes were very dark and very present, and I remember thinking, even in that moment, that I had never seen him quite this clearly before, or maybe I had always seen him this clearly, and had always pretended I hadn't. 6 months, I said. My voice was not fully steady. I decided not to be embarrassed about that. 6 months, he confirmed. He was watching me with that direct, careful attention, maybe more. I wasn't honest with myself about it until, do you remember the night the power went out, junior year? The candle light, I said, when you asked about the version of yourself you hadn't been brave enough to show. Something shifted in his expression. I was asking about you, he said quietly. I was asking because I was wondering if you were where I was, and you said yes, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what I was ready to do with that. 3 years. We had been having the same conversation in parallel, on the other side of 2 closed doors, for 3 years, and we had come so close so many times, and moved away and come close again, and moved away, and here we were finally in a living room at midnight, in December, with everything on the table and nowhere left to hide. Marcus, I said, because it needed to be said. He shook his head. Nothing happened. It wasn't I couldn't. I kept trying to understand why I couldn't, and I think I know now. He met my eyes directly, because there was already someone, there has been, for a long time. There was just also 3 years of me not being ready to say it out loud, even to myself. I thought about all the mornings, all the coffees, all the films on the couch, and late nights in the library, and walks through the Maple Boulevard, all the times I had looked away before he could see too much, all the times I had held myself back from the edge. 3 years of two people loving each other from a very careful distance and calling it friendship and meaning it, and also meaning something else entirely, simultaneously the whole time. We wasted a lot of time, I said. Maybe, he said, And then, or maybe we needed all of it to get here. I don't know, he paused. I think I'm still figuring out a lot of this. What it means, what I want, how to say these things. He looked at me steadily. But I know you. You are the person I know most, and I know that what I feel about you is different from anything else I've felt, and I know it's been there for longer than I admitted, and I'm done not admitting it. He paused again, a breath, then quietly but clearly, I love you, the same way, the all of it way. I looked at him for a long time. Then I laughed, not a performance of laughter, genuine, small, helpless laughter, the kind that comes when the thing you have been holding finally lets go of you rather than the other way around. He looked confused for half a second, then his face softened and he smiled, that warm, slow, unbothered smile, and the tension in the room shifted to something that was still incredibly present but no longer frightening, something warm and real and lit from inside. I've been writing around this in my thesis for 3 months, I said. My advisor kept telling me I wasn't committing to the truth at the center. She had no idea. He laughed now too, and it was one of my favorite sounds. It had always been one of my favorite sounds, and in this context, it was almost unbearably good. We sat together for a long time after that, talking, really talking. The way you can only talk once the important thing has been said, when the air is cleared and the walls are down. He told me about the moments he had noticed, the ones that had been building in him, the night in the library when I wasn't watching the film, the times on this very couch when the distance had simply disappeared, the morning I had woken up first and held still in the lamplight of his room when he'd been sick. Second year and I'd stayed on the couch all night. I hadn't known he was aware of that last one. He had been aware of most of it, which I probably should have expected. He had always been paying attention. I told him about my side of it, the candle light in the storm, junior year, the feeling of his hand on my shoulder over my draft, the 11 minutes on this couch, the morning I finally admitted to myself what I had known for a long time. He was quiet when I described the 11 minutes. He looked at the couch, then at me. I wasn't asleep for all of them, he said very carefully. I stared at him. What? He met my eyes, and there was something in his expression that was both guilty and exactly right. I woke up before you, he said. I didn't move because I didn't want to. His jaw tightened slightly, a gesture of admission. I was trying to figure out what to say. Then you woke up and moved away, and I said morning, and you were so closed off, and I didn't know how to. I pressed my lips together. You absolute. I know, he said, and he was trying not to smile. I know, I'm sorry. 11 minutes, I said. 11 minutes of me silently having an existential crisis, and you were just sitting there knowing. Having my own existential crisis, he said. That's important context. I looked at him, he looked at me. The laughter came again, both of us. This time real and rolling and helpless, and it was a release of something that had been held tightly for far too long, and in the middle of it his hand found mine on the couch cushion between us, and I felt his fingers close over mine, and I held on. When the laughter settled, we sat in the quiet with his hand over mine, and the lamp burning warm in December outside the window, and it was the most specific and absolute feeling of home that I had ever felt. Not the home that is a place, the home that is a person, the home that you don't find by looking but by finally, after a long time and a lot of careful distance, letting yourself stop moving. December, the days that followed. There is a particular quality to the days that follow a truth finally told. Everything is the same and nothing is the same. You move through the familiar geography of your life, and it looks identical to how it looked before, but the light has changed, the way things feel in your Hands has changed, something that was slightly wrong for a very long time has shifted back to right, and you feel it in your body before you fully process it with your mind. The morning after, I woke up in my room and lay there for a moment, listening to the apartment wake up, the sounds I knew so well, his alarm, the opening of his door, footsteps to the kitchen, the running of the tap, the first knock and hiss of the coffee maker, and I felt something that I can only call clean, like a sky after rain, like a window that has been opened in a room that needed air. I got up and went to the kitchen, and he was there, and we looked at each other with the particular awareness of two people who said all the true things the night before and are now in the daylight for the first time with those true things between them. He was holding his coffee mug, and he had clearly also been in the state of thinking about the night before and about this morning and about all of it, because his expression had that quality of thoughtfulness that meant things were still being arranged internally. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. We looked at each other for a moment. Then he handed me my coffee, already made exactly right, the way he always made it, and said, "So, how are you doing?" in a tone that acknowledged everything the question contained. "Better than I have been in months," I said honestly. He nodded. "Yeah, me too." A pause. Still a lot to figure out, though. "I know," I said, and I did know, because saying the truth is the beginning of something, not the end. There was still the figuring out of what we were becoming, how the shape of us changed. Now that we had said the things we said, there was still the navigating of new territory between two people who knew each other very well and were also in some ways meeting each other for the first time. There was still the work, but the work felt entirely different when it was no longer being done alone in the dark against yourself. We talked over coffee for 2 hours that morning, not urgently, without the contained desperation of the night before, which had been necessary and was also exhausting. This was quieter, more like the conversations we had always had, except with a different degree of openness, doors open that had always been slightly closed. He talked about things he hadn't said before, about the long discomfort of not having the language for what he felt, growing up in a household where these things were not discussed, the particular confusion of a person who has been socialized toward one set of expectations and discovers they don't fit, not entirely. I recognized every part of it. I had spent years in that same confusion, trying to find words for a feeling that the readily available vocabulary didn't quite fit. "I still don't have all the words," he said, at one point, his hands wrapped around his mug. "I know what I feel. I'm still figuring out how to categorize it, I guess, or whether categorizing it matters." "I think it matters less than you think," I said. "I think the feeling is the thing. The rest is just language for other people." He looked at me. "You've thought about this more than I have," he said. "Obviously," I said, and he laughed, surprised, and it landed exactly right. We took it slowly. That felt right for both of us, not rushing toward a definition or a label, just being honest about what was there and letting it develop at its own rate. There were days that were exactly like before, our ordinary rhythms unchanged, the coffee and the couch, and the Friday films, and there were moments that were new, small, careful, tender things that were different from before in ways that both of us were still learning the grammar of. The morning he left for the holiday break, he was going home to Chicago for 3 weeks. We said goodbye on the sidewalk in front of the apartment while his rideshare idled at the curb. He had his bags at his feet, and the December sky was white above us, and his breath was fogging in the cold. He looked at me for a moment, and then he stepped forward and put his arms around me, not the quick, easy hug we had always had, but something different, slower and tighter, and more certain, his chin against my temple and his hand at the back of my shoulder, and the whole warmth of him pulled close against the cold. I held on. I held on with both hands and felt in the complete and certain way of someone who has finally arrived somewhere that this was where I was supposed to be. He pulled back. His hands were on my shoulders and his eyes found mine. Immediately, the way they always did, the way they had always done in every crowded room and every quiet apartment and every moment that had led to this one. "I'll call you," he said. "You'd better," I said. He smiled. He picked up his bags and got into the car, and the door closed and it pulled away, and I stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a long time, watching the corner where the car had turned, my hands in my pockets, the city going about its morning around me, everything changed and everything the same. He called that evening. We talked for 2 hours. We talked every day of those 3 weeks. January, second semester. January came and he came back to it. I was at the apartment when he got back. I had come back a few days earlier, and I heard his key in the lock and felt the shift in the air that his presence always made. The specific change in the quality of a space when Luca Mercer is in it. He came through the door with his bags and his curly hair and 3 weeks of phone calls between us, and looked around the apartment like it was somewhere beloved, which it was, and then he looked at me, and it was nothing like any of the other times he had come through that door, and also exactly like all of them, because it was just him. It had always just been him, and I had always looked at him this way. I just wasn't looking away now. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. He set down his bags and crossed the room, and I met him halfway, which I thought later was the right way for it to work, meeting halfway. And we held each other in the entryway of the apartment we had shared for 2 years while January light came through the window, and neither of us was in a hurry to let go. Second semester had a different character to it from everything before. Still the thesis, still his capstone project, still the rhythms we had built over 3 years, but with an ease and an openness between us that had been missing, or only partially there, for longer than I had understood. The conversations were fuller, the silences were richer. The small things, coffee in the morning, the couch in the evening, walking through campus in the cold, felt illuminated from inside in a way that I struggled to explain, except to say that the same light was hitting them that had always hit them, but the glass was clean now. I told my advisor that I had found the truth at the center of my thesis. She read the new pages and was quiet for a long moment, and then looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "This is your best work. This is what it was always trying to be." I went home and told Luca. He was very pleased with himself in a way that had nothing to do with the thesis and everything to do with the fact that he considered himself to have contributed to the clarity of my prose through the indirect mechanism of being himself. I told him that was not how writing worked. He said he stood by his contribution. I could not find a convincing argument against it. There were still complications. He had conversations with himself and sometimes with me about things that were still unresolved, about what it meant to know yourself differently than you had always thought you did, about how to navigate that honestly in the context of the people in your life, about the distance between what you feel and what you have the language to express. I held space for all of it. I did not rush any of it. He had given me the same patience for years in ways he did not always know about, and I understood that what someone needs sometimes is not answers, but the specific reassurance of being allowed to be where they are. He told his closest friend from home over a phone call one evening, I wasn't there for it, I was in my room, but I heard the low cadence of the call, the length of it, the tone when he came out afterward, quiet and slightly wrung out but clear, the way people are after they have said something true to someone they trust. He came and sat with me on the couch and said, "That was easier than I thought," and then after a moment and harder, I said, "Yeah, that sounds right." He leaned his head back against the couch and looked at the ceiling and breathed. I sat beside him and let the quiet be what it needed to be. His friend was good about it, as it turned out, as most people are, when the people who matter are given the chance to show up. Spring arrived the way spring arrives at Ashford, gradually then. Suddenly, the trees going from bare to budding seemingly overnight. The temperature lifting, the campus filling back up with people who had been staying inside. Everything had the quality of coming out of something, of being new on the other side of a long winter. I had always loved spring on this campus. I loved it more this year. We walked the Maple Boulevard one afternoon in March, when the branches were just beginning to show the first pale green of early leaves, the light thin and clear. We were walking the way we always walked, close, unhurried, talking about something that I no longer remember the subject of, and his hand found mine without ceremony, without announcement, naturally, the way you reach for something that belongs in your hand. I looked down at our hands and then up at him, and he was already looking at me with that expression I had been collecting for 3 years, that warm, direct, fully present attention that I had once spent so much time trying not to interpret correctly. "You're doing that thing," he said. "What thing?" "Where you look at something like you're memorizing it." I squeezed his hand. "Old habit," I said. He smiled and looked forward, and we walked on through the beginning of spring, through the campus we had been learning to love for 3 years, on a path we had walked 100 times before, and which was now, in the specific and irreversible way of things that have finally become what they were always moving toward, completely new. May, graduation week. Graduation came in May, the way all endings come too fast when you wanted more time, and exactly on schedule in some deeper sense. The campus was spectacular in the first week of May, the maples in full leaf, the lawns impossibly green, the air warm and carrying the smell of grass and old stone, and something like the very specific scent of a chapter closing. I had written a thesis that my committee called the best undergraduate creative writing submission of the year, which I accepted with a pride that was partly for myself and partly for the truth I had finally been brave enough to put in it. Luca's capstone design received a departmental award and a commendation from his thesis committee, and a job offer from a firm in Seattle that he had applied to on a night when he didn't think I was paying attention, which I always was. We sat in the quad the afternoon before graduation, in the long late light of a May evening, on the bench by the old elm tree that had been there since the university was founded, and which everyone called something affectionate and slightly irreverent. We had sat on this bench before many times over 3 years, but this was the last time as students, and we both knew it, and the knowledge gave the evening a quality that was both sweet and unbearable in the specific way that only beautiful things ending can be. I had my notebook. I was not writing in it, just holding it the way you hold things that have been part of how you've gotten through. He had his hands loose in his lap and was looking at the campus with that particular quality of attention that meant he was seeing it the way an architect sees a space, not just what it is but what it means, the intention behind it, the way it holds the people inside it. "I keep trying to memorize it," he said. I smiled. "Old habit," I said, and he looked at me and remembered that I had said it on the boulevard in March, and the smile that crossed His face was quiet and private, and exactly right. We sat for a while in the accumulation of 3 years and 4 seasons. And everything that had happened, and everything that was still ahead. Seattle was ahead. He had said yes to the offer. I had a graduate program offer from a university 3 hours north, one I had worked very hard for and which I was going to accept, and 3 hours was not nothing, but it was also not the same building, not the same couch, not the same coffee every morning. We had talked about it honestly, both of us, in the way we now talked about everything, with the full attention and honesty that we had spent too long withholding. It was going to require things. It was going to be different. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Of which part?" I said. "Any of it." I thought about it. "Not in the way I used to be scared of things," I said. "Not in the way where you're scared because you can't see where you are. I know where I am now." I looked at him. "I'm scared the way you're scared when you know something matters, the good kind." He looked at me for a long moment. The light was going long and warm across the quad, catching in the leaves of the old elm above us. He reached over and placed his hand briefly against the side of my face. The softest, most careful touch, the kind that means I see you, the kind that means you are real to me. And I closed my eyes for one moment and just felt it, just let it be exactly what it was, nothing larger or smaller. Then he took his hand back and looked forward again, and the moment settled into the evening like all the other moments we had accumulated and kept. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly, not as a question, as the kind of statement that is both a belief and a commitment. "Yeah," I said, "we are." Graduation morning was the way graduation mornings always are, and nothing like any graduation morning has ever been. We wore our gowns in the apartment on Fletcher Street, and I took a photo of him by the window, and he took a photo of me, and we walked to the ceremony together through the May morning, past the dry cleaner that now smelled of cinnamon, through the streets we had memorized, under the trees we had walked under 1,000 times. His family was there, his mother, who cried at everything good, his father who had come around slowly and imperfectly and with genuine love underneath the difficulty. My parents were there, my mother pressing her hand to my face and my father doing the thing where he held my shoulder for a beat longer than he needed to and said nothing, which meant everything. After the ceremony, in the reception lawn with the gown still on and champagne in plastic cups, I found him across the grass looking for me the way he always found me in crowded rooms, his eyes moving through the crowd with that specific purpose. When they landed on me, he smiled, the full one, the unbothered one, the one that had always made whatever room I was in feel warmer. I crossed the grass toward him, he crossed toward me. We met in the middle. "We did it," he said. "We did," I said. He pulled me into a hug, long and tight and full, the way the one on the sidewalk in December had been, except this time there was no departing car at the curb, no cold breath fogging in the air, no 3 weeks of distance ahead of us, just this, the grass and the sun, and his arms around me, and 4 years of a story still being written. When he pulled back, his hands were on my shoulders and his eyes were right there, right where they always were, where I would look for them for the rest of my life. "Wherever I end up," he said, and there was so much in those words. All of it deliberate, all of it true. "You're where I want to be." I looked at him, my best friend, the person I had loved quietly and privately and incorrectly, and then finally, fully and honestly, in every way it was possible to mean it, the person who had been right there on the other side of a wall for all of it. "You were always where I truly belonged," I said. The May light was warm, and the campus was beautiful, and everything was ending and beginning, the way things always are. The way the best things always are, and I understood in the full and certain way. Someone who has finally arrived somewhere after a very long journey. That finding where you belong is not about a place or a program or a city to the north or a city to the west. It is about the specific, an irreplaceable truth of someone who knows you, all of you, the quiet and the complicated, and the parts you kept in notebooks and the parts you said at midnight in December, and the parts you are still becoming and who is still here and who chooses to keep being here, and in whose presence you are, without reservation, exactly yourself. That is where I truly belong. With him. Epilogue 6 months later. There is an apartment in Seattle with large windows and a view of gray water and a coffee table covered in architectural sketches. There is a lo-fi playlist that plays most nights from a phone on the desk. There is a shelf of books arranged alphabetically and a half-finished manuscript on a laptop and a coffee maker that makes coffee too strong, and toast that comes out slightly burnt and which is eaten without complaint. There are 2 mugs, there are 2 desks, there is 1 couch, and on most evenings, no particular distance between the 2 people on it. I am working on a novel. It is about 2 people who spend a long time being afraid of the most true thing between them, and who found their way to it eventually, and whose story is, as all the best stories are, still being written. I am writing it with the full commitment to the truth at the center. Professor Callahan would approve. On a Tuesday morning in November, I woke up on the couch with his arm around my shoulder. The gray Seattle light was in the windows. His breathing was slow and deep and certain. The clock on the wall said 7:42. I did not count the minutes. I closed my eyes and stayed exactly where I was. The end. Yellow heart, if this story found you at the right moment, you already know why you stayed until the end, not just for the romance, though it was worth every slow, aching, beautiful minute, but because somewhere in Noah's voice, in Luca's silences, in the 11 minutes on the couch, and the candle light during the storm, and the maple boulevard in all 4 seasons, you recognize something. That's what these stories are for. Bell call to action. If Noah's story moved you, if you held your breath during the couch scene, if the kitchen conversation made your chest tight, if the moment in the gallery hit you in a way you weren't fully ready for, subscribe to the Romance Hub so you never miss a story like this one. Like this video, it takes 2 seconds and it means everything for this channel. Comment below which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the couch, the showcase, the hallway in December? I read every single one. And tell me this in the comments. Right arrow, should Luca tell us his side of the story? Because there is a part 2. There is so much I didn't show you. The 6 months between graduation and Seattle, the conversation Luca had with himself in Chicago during those 3 winter weeks, the moment he understood what he felt before Noah did, the night he almost said it first and didn't, and what was going through his mind during all 11 of those minutes on the couch. Should I tell you? Let me know below. Framed picture thumbnail prompt, click-worthy, CTR optimized. Title card text, he was awake the whole time. Left side visual. 2 young men on a couch in a warmly lit apartment, pre-dawn gray light filtering through a window behind them. One is asleep, or appears to be, with his arm resting along the back of the couch, head slightly tilted, expression unguarded and peaceful. The other is awake beside him, sitting completely still, eyes forward but the posture frozen. The body language of someone who is very carefully not moving. His hands are clasped in his lap. There is a clock on the wall in soft focus behind them. The emotional register is longing, restraint. The held breath of someone standing at the edge of something enormous. Cinematic lighting, warm amber lamp glow versus cool dawn light from the window, close physical proximity without any explicit touch. Emotional tension is entirely in posture, expression, and the charged space between them. Right side, empty/blank, reserved for title text overlay. Color grade, warm amber and cool blue contrast, moody, intimate. Cinematic, high emotional impact. To men only, no explicit content, no nudity. Designed for maximum CTR in the gay romance/BL story niche. Copyright The Romance Hub, where I truly belong. Written for YouTube, LGBTQ+ safe content, 18+ romantic story.